I should start with the snow. It came early that year, blanketing our old farmhouse like a mercy the world didn't deserve. I remember the hush that settled over the front yard, how the white drifts swallowed every track and flaw. But inside, the house was a wreck of tension and stale secrets. My name is Margot Renfield. If you've never heard that last name, good. I've done my best to bury it under layers of borrowed smiles and forged paperwork. But back when my brother Ellis decided that my share of our parents' legacy was better off in his pocket, I was still naive enough to believe blood meant loyalty. Our father's funeral had been a cold affair. The man had lived hard and loved no one well enough to mourn him honestly. Except maybe me, though that's a lie I've told myself too many nights to count. My mother was long gone by then, the cancer hollowing her out when I was only 17. Ellis, of course, was the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, the older son. The favorite, even when our father spat poison between sips of bourbon. I was the one who stayed, who kept the books for Dad's crumbling hardware store, who paid the overdue tax bills with my own wages from the small-town library, who sat with him in his final weeks when he forgot his own name, but never failed to remind me how little I'd amounted to. And when the will was read, it was Ellis who held the lawyer's envelope in his greedy fingers. I'll never forget the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, just kept tapping that damned gold fountain pen on the table as the old solicitor droned on about primary beneficiary and last testament. He got the house, the land, the store, what was left of it, and he got the cash reserves, pitiful as they were. I got a box of dusty letters my mother had written and never mailed. No money, no share, not even the antique clock in the foyer that Mom promised me when I was 12. Ellis looked at me when the lawyer left. He smiled that same fox smile he'd worn since we were kids, like he was already calculating what else he could wring from me. "Don't pout, Margot," he said. "You wouldn't know what to do with all this responsibility." I said nothing. I wanted to throw the teacup I was holding at his forehead, watch the porcelain shatter on his smug face. Instead, I stood up, packed my single suitcase, and walked out the door while the snow piled high on the porch steps. I didn't look back. But secrets have a way of circling back to you. And that year, Christmas was waiting for me like a trap. I found out, 2 weeks after Dad's burial, that Ellis had lied about everything. The old man hadn't trusted him either. He'd left clauses and stipulations that Ellis had hidden, forged, or paid off the lawyer to ignore. I only knew because Mom's letters hinted at a separate trust, money in an account tied to the mortgage on Ellis's house, a mortgage our father owned outright. When I read that line in her shaky handwriting, "Don't let him take what's yours, Margot. Your father knew he couldn't stop Ellis, but he made sure you could." Something in me hardened. For the first time in my life, I understood how cold a Renfield could be. I spent that winter quietly. I dug up every piece of paper Dad ever signed. I called banks and threatened court orders when they tried to stonewall me. I found the old lawyer's replacement and promised him a bottle of Glenfiddich if he'd accidentally misplaced the right files in my hands. By spring, I had it all. The trust, the deed to the mortgage, Ellis's lavish country house, bought with Dad's hush money for some affair he'd had, and mortgaged to the hilt. Except the lien was in the name of the Renfield family holdings, which now meant me. He didn't know. Not yet. He was too busy burning through every cent he thought he'd stolen from me, throwing parties in the barn that used to hold our mother's piano, driving that flashy sports car through town like a peacock on parade. But I knew, and every day I'd run my fingers over the embossed seal on the mortgage papers, reminding myself that revenge doesn't come hot. It comes slow, patient, precise. So when Christmas came around again, I did what any good sister would do. I sent him a card, a single line in my neatest handwriting, "Enjoy the snow while it lasts." And beneath that, tucked in the envelope, was the first overdue payment notice. No lawyer's letterhead, just my name at the bottom, next to the Renfield Holdings stamp. He called me that night, drunk, sputtering, accused me of forging it, threatened to sue me, said he'd ruin me. I let him scream. Then I told him the truth. I own you now, Ellis. I own the roof over your head. I own every Christmas light strung across your eaves." He hung up, but he didn't sleep that night. I know because I sat in my little rented flat, sipping cheap wine by the window, watching the snow fall, picturing him pacing the halls of that house, our house, wondering how the hell he'd gotten outplayed by the sister he'd always called soft. It's funny how snow makes everything look pure, untouched, but underneath, the ground is frozen solid, roots cracked, seeds waiting to break through. That was me. For the first time, I felt the frost in my veins. I'm not proud of what came next. Not entirely. But I'd lie if I said I regret it. I didn't steal my inheritance back. I just reclaimed what was already mine. And I was only just getting started. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. I didn't sleep much after I sent that first notice. Not because I doubted what I'd done, but because something in me had snapped awake for the first time in years. There's an edge to cold revenge that warms your bones in the strangest way. It doesn't thaw you, not really. It just keeps you alert, like a wolf who's learned the scent of blood. The morning after Ellis's call, I stepped out onto the icy sidewalk, my boots crunching through the crusted snow. I could almost feel him pacing in his fancy house, staring at his wife. Yes, he'd married a brittle, glassy woman named Lydia the year before, and lying to her about why we'd spoken. I wondered what story he'd tell her to keep her loyal. He was always good at that, spinning fairy tales that made him the wounded hero. I caught the bus to work, the same library I'd served in since college. No one there knew what I was doing, what I was becoming. To them, I was just Margot, the quiet one who remembered patrons' birthdays and snuck overdue fines off the books for kids with ragged coats. I liked that mask. It gave me cover. And more than that, it reminded me that I wasn't my father. Or my brother. Not yet. That week, Ellis didn't pay. Not a penny. The mortgage payment was due on the first of every month. My father's stipulation, probably to keep Ellis under his thumb forever. The irony made me laugh when I read the old contract again. My mother's letters spread across my bed like fallen leaves. Her voice felt close in those moments, a whisper reminding me, "Don't be like them, but don't be weak." When the second notice arrived, I made it hand-delivered. I took the train out to the edge of town, where the real snowdrifts towered over half-buried fences and the roads glittered with black ice. I wore my mother's old coat, wool, moth-eaten in the lining, but warm enough to guard my resolve. I remember standing at his front door, the wreath above it absurdly cheerful, fake berries dusted with plastic snow. Lydia opened it. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Margot?" She sounded like she wasn't sure if she should hug me or slam the door. "Is Ellis home?" I asked. She hesitated, then stepped back, ushering me in like a stray dog. The house was even more garish inside than I'd imagined. Rooms full of new furniture and expensive rugs. The scent of spiced candles trying to hide the rot of secrets. Ellis appeared at the top of the staircase, his bathrobe hanging open like he'd just crawled out of bed at noon. His hair stuck out in greasy clumps, his eyes bloodshot. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed. I handed him the envelope. "Just business, brother." Lydia looked between us, her painted nails worrying the hem of her sleeve. "Ellis, what's this?" "Nothing," he snapped. "Just some misunderstanding." "Margot, you need to open it," I said, my voice sharper than I'd planned. He did. The paper shook in his hands. Lydia snatched it away, her eyes scanning the typed words, the signature at the bottom. She paled. "We're behind on the mortgage? Ellis, you said it was paid off." He looked at her like she was an insect he might crush if she spoke again. "It's a formality. Margot's making trouble. She's lying." "I'm not," I said, stepping closer to him. "And you know it. This house is mine now. Pay what you owe or pack your bags." He lunged forward so fast I almost flinched. Almost. But he stopped inches from my face, his breath sour with whiskey and fear. "You think you're clever? You think you can pull this off?" His voice was a ragged whisper. "I'll ruin you." I let out a small laugh, low and humorless. "I'm counting on it. The more noise you make, the more eyes will look at your books. Want them to see where the inheritance went?" Want them to know how much you skimmed from Dad's store before you closed it down." His nostrils flared. For a moment, I thought he might hit me, but Lydia's gasp behind him seemed to snap him back. He stepped away, straightened his robe like he could cover up the stench of panic. "Get out," he snarled. "Have your payment by next week," I said, "or I'll file for foreclosure. Merry Christmas, Ellis." Outside, the cold wind slapped my cheeks raw. My fingers trembled around the steering wheel of my old truck as I drove away. I told myself it was the cold, but deep down I knew it was adrenaline. Power tasted new on my tongue, sharp, almost metallic. I didn't want it. I needed it. At work, I kept my head down. I shelved books, stamped returns, chatted with old Mrs. Denning about her mystery novels. Normal, everyday things that felt unreal compared to the hurricane spinning in my mind. At night I'd sit with the mortgage papers spread out like a tarot reading, tracing the lines that bound Ellis to me. One evening I got a call from Lydia. She was crying. Said she didn't know. Said she didn't sign up for this. "Margot," she whispered, her voice shaking through the line. "He's lying to me, isn't he?" "You already know the answer," I said. "Get out while you can." "I can't. He'll take everything." I almost told her about the separate bank accounts I'd found. Ellis's hidden stash, where he funneled the hardware store's last profits. I didn't. Not yet. Lydia was collateral damage, but she wasn't innocent either. She'd stood by him when he shut me out. She'd smiled at the funeral like she'd won something. I didn't owe her rescue. The week ended with a storm. A blizzard that shut down the county roads, stranded people in grocery stores and gas stations. I sat by my apartment window with a single candle flickering on the sill, my breath fogging the glass as I watched the flakes swirl like a white curtain over the city. Ellis called me 3 times, left voicemails that swung from threats to sobs to promises. I deleted them all. I wanted him desperate. Desperation makes people careless. The next morning, I filed the first official foreclosure notice. I printed it myself at the library, hidden between pages of community event flyers. The irony wasn't lost on me. Destroying my brother's kingdom from a desk surrounded by children's storybooks and overdue cookbooks. I signed it in blue ink, just like my mother used to do when she wrote her letters. I walked it down to the county clerk myself, the snow biting at my ankles where my boots didn't quite reach my cuffs. The clerk didn't look twice at me, just stamped it, filed it, and handed me the copy. When I stepped back outside, the world felt cleaner, sharper. I tucked the paper inside my coat, pressing it to my chest as if it were a heartbeat I'd stolen back from him. That night, Lydia showed up at my door. She looked like a ghost, hair unbrushed, eyes rimmed red. She didn't ask permission to come in. She just stood in my kitchen while I made tea, her fingers twitching at the chipped mug I handed her. "You're really doing this," she said. "Yes. He'll destroy you. Maybe. But he'll lose first." She set the mug down so hard it cracked. "I don't want to lose my home. Then convince him to pay. Or leave." She stared at me like she wanted to hate me, but she didn't. She knew who the monster was. And it wasn't the woman who refused to stay silent. When she left, I sat at the kitchen table long after the tea had gone cold. The old radiator rattled in the corner, its hiss and pop the only sound in my tiny flat. I felt my mother's presence again, like she was sitting across from me, her knotted fingers drumming the tabletop the way she used to when she was deep in thought. "You did good, Margot," I whispered into the silence. "You did right." But somewhere deep in my chest, I wondered, did I? Outside, the snow kept falling, burying the city inch by inch. And in that hush, I knew this was only the beginning. He'd fight me. He'd drag my name through the mud. He'd throw every filthy trick he had my way. But I wasn't the girl who'd stood silent while he stole my future. Not anymore. I was the Renfield who'd learned to wield the frost, and when spring came, he'd learned just how sharp my edges had grown. When the blizzard finally broke, a ragged gray dawn cracked open over the town like a wound that wouldn't close. I remember standing at my window, staring at the half-frozen street below, the snowplow carving through drifts that reached the mailbox tops. My breath left ghosts on the glass. Ellis hadn't called again. Not yet. He was quiet now. Too quiet. And that worried me more than his drunken threats. Because my brother never stayed still for long. He was a snake, coiled under the floorboards, waiting for my warmth to come close enough to strike. I packed my mother's letters into a battered shoebox and slid them onto the top shelf of my closet. For weeks, I'd read them every night, tracing her words like a rosary. Reminders that our father's cruelty didn't have to define me, that the past could be used as a weapon or a shield if I was brave enough to hold it right. But I needed my hands free now. The real world was colder than her ink could keep me. At the library, I watched the days melt into a damp, lingering thaw. I kept my head down. The town kept its eyes closed. Nobody knew the fight brewing in the old Renfield family name. To them, Ellis was still the prodigal son, the small-town prince who threw garden parties behind those big brick gates. And me, just the mousy sister who'd run off after the funeral. They didn't know I'd just bought the tax liens on his land, too. The trick was simple, really. Ellis had let the property taxes slip, assuming the mortgage covered it. He didn't read the fine print. He never did. So the county auctioned off the debt to anyone willing to pay, and I stood there in that stale municipal building, checkbook in hand, smiling at the clueless clerk who wondered why I'd want so much worthless land. Worthless to them, but to Ellis it was pride and status and the only mask he had left. I told no one what I'd done. I went home. I stacked the papers in a neat file folder, locked it in the safe I'd hidden under my bed. Every time I turned the key, I felt that wolf's heartbeat thrum through my veins. I wondered what my mother would say if she could see me now. I wondered if she'd even recognize me. A week later, Lydia came to the library. She looked older, like she hadn't slept since the foreclosure notice. Her coat was too thin for the wet spring wind, and her mascara clung to the corners of her lashes like soot. "Margot," she said, too loud for the hushed rows of bookshelves. I set down the box of donated novels I'd been sorting. "Lydia, should we talk somewhere else?" She ignored the question, just grabbed my wrist with fingers cold as the March rain outside. "He knows you bought the liens. He found the papers." Of course he did. That was the point. I led her into the staff break room, shut the door behind us. The smell of stale coffee and old cardboard filled the space. Lydia paced, her heels scuffing the linoleum. "He's furious," she said. "He's talking about, I don't know, lawsuits, calling the police." "For what?" I cut in. "Buying property he neglected? Everything I did is legal." "You're ruining us," she snapped. The mask cracked then. Her voice rose to a brittle shriek before she caught herself. She pressed a hand to her mouth, breathing hard. "God, I didn't sign up for this." "No," I said quietly. "You signed up for the Renfield name. For his promises. For the parties and the bank account." She dropped her hand. The slap of her palm on the table echoed. "What do you want from us, Margot? You've made your point. Take your money and go." "I don't want his money," I said, and I meant it. I want him to remember who he buried when he took that will from me. I want him to learn that every lie comes home eventually. She stared at me, 1,000 arguments dying on her tongue. I almost pitied her. Almost. "Lydia," I said, softening, "you don't have to stay. There's still time for you to walk away." She laughed. Sharp, bitter. "Walk where, Margot? You think I have family left who'd take me in after what he did to them? You think I can afford my own place?" She pushed past me, her coat sleeve brushing mine. Her perfume, something expensive, too floral, lingered after she left. I stood in that break room until my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Ellis. "You think you've won. Watch your back." No signature, no flourish, just that. I felt my pulse thrum against my ribs, not with fear, but with something like anticipation. He'd make his move now. He'd have to. That night, I drove out to the farmhouse. The old place looked half swallowed by mud and melting snow, the driveway rutted and soft. I parked by the roadside, engine ticking in the dark. The windows of Ellis's house glowed gold behind the drapes. I could almost see him pacing, cursing me by name. It felt like visiting a grave. I stood at the fence line for a long time, breathing the wet air, letting the ghosts of my parents drift around me. My father's voice. "You're not strong enough." My mother's. "Yes, you are." I left a note pinned to the front door. "Next payment due in 10 days. No threats, just the truth. The truth was enough. He called again the next morning, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I didn't speak. I let him burn himself out, his words slurring into exhausted wheezing. When he paused to catch his breath, I said, "You should put that energy into finding the money. Where do you expect me to get it, Margot?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Sell your car, sell your watch, or sell the lies you've been peddling all these years. I'm sure someone will buy." He hung up. I didn't hear from him for 2 days. When he resurfaced, he'd found a lawyer, some oily local shark who'd handled Ellis's shady real estate deals before. They tried to serve me with papers at the library. It was pathetic, really. The documents were half-baked threats, empty legal jargon meant to scare me off. But I knew the code. I'd spent nights reading case files, listening to webinars, learning exactly what it would take to keep him pinned under my thumb. When I got home that night, there was a car idling at the curb outside my apartment. Not Ellis's shiny sports car. This one was black, tinted windows, the engine growling low like a predator's purr. A man stepped out as I approached. He was big, shoulders that strained his coat seams, hands like shovel blades. He didn't say my name, didn't smile, just stood between me and my front door. "You, Margot Renfield?" I nodded. I didn't flinch, though my legs itched to run. "What do you want?" He pulled an envelope from inside his coat. Thick, cream-colored, no return address. He shoved it into my hands, turned, and got back in the car without a word. The engine coughed to life and rolled away into the night. Inside, under my one flickering kitchen light, I tore the envelope open. No letter, just a stack of photos. Me, walking to work. Me, leaving the county clerk's office. Me, standing at my mother's grave, head bowed, the fresh snow clinging to my coat. Someone had been following me for weeks. At the bottom of the stack was a single note, typed on a scrap of paper. "Enough is enough." My hands didn't shake. They should have, but they didn't. Instead, I felt a calm settle into my bones, a chill so deep it burned. Ellis had crossed a line. He wanted to scare me, make me feel small again. He'd forgotten the one rule our father drilled into us: never show your enemy your fear. I tucked the photos back into the envelope. I poured myself a glass of water, and I sat at my table until dawn, planning. The next week, I bought a security camera for my door, changed my locks. I found out who the private investigator was, some old drunk who'd lost his license in another state. I sent him a little letter of my own, a cease and desist with a copy of the restraining order I'd file if I saw him near me again. Ellis wasn't ready for that. He called, howling about betrayal, about how I was turning his life into a circus. He still didn't see. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival. About proving to myself that I could stand up to him, and the ghost of our father and the empty rooms of that house that used to be ours. One night, I dreamed of my mother. She was standing in the kitchen, making tea. Her back was to me. I called her name, but she didn't turn. When I reached for her, she dissolved like breath on glass. I woke up with tears on my cheeks and the taste of blood in my mouth from where I'd bitten my tongue. I got up, washed my face, looked at my reflection until my eyes stopped seeing her ghost behind me. Ellis thought he could scare me back into that soft, pliable sister. He'd never met the woman I was now, the woman who didn't flinch when the cold wind bit deeper. When the next mortgage payment came due, I didn't even send a notice. I sent the foreclosure team. Let him watch the process server hammer that sign into his perfect front lawn. Let him taste the fear he'd spoon-fed me my whole life. Outside my apartment, the snow was melting into mud. But inside me, winter was just beginning. I remember the exact moment the first "for sale" sign went up on Ellis's front lawn. It was early April, the ground still soggy from the thaw. I parked my old truck across the street, engine idling, windshield wipers scraping away a drizzle that couldn't quite decide whether it was rain or sleet. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching the real estate agent plant the sign like a flag on conquered soil. He didn't know the whole story, of course. To him, Ellis was just another overextended client, someone whose debts had finally caught up with the size of his ego. But I knew every crack in those brick walls, every lie that paid for each marble countertop and imported rug. When the agent finally left, I stepped out of the truck. The wind bit through my coat, carrying the smell of thawing earth and distant chimney smoke. I walked up to the fence, fingers tracing the wrought iron that used to keep the world out. I wondered if Ellis was inside, peeking through the blinds, cursing my name. I hoped he was watching. I didn't knock on the door, there was no need. I'd said everything worth saying months ago when I'd bought the mortgage out from under him. Now, I just wanted him to see me, his sister, the girl he used to dismiss as the family ghost, standing on the edge of the property he no longer owned in any real sense. The next week, word spread like a cold wind through town. Small towns love a scandal, especially when it comes wrapped in the Renfield name. I heard the whispers when I shelved books at the library. Mrs. Denning tried to corner me near the reference desk, her eyes wide with a hunger for gossip she pretended was concern. "Margot, dear, is it true your brother's losing the house? Such a shame, after everything your family's been through." I smiled, the way I'd learned to smile when I wanted people to look away. "Some debts come due, Mrs. Denning. That's all." She didn't know what to do with that. She scurried off, clutching her paperback thriller to her chest like it might protect her from the frost in my voice. Lydia called me that night. She sounded tired. So tired I almost didn't recognize her voice. "Margot. Lydia. We need to talk." I closed my eyes, leaned back against my headboard. "About what?" "Ellis is going to do something stupid. I know that look in his eyes. He's drinking more, staying out all night. He keeps saying you forced his hand." I almost laughed. "Forced his hand? He held the deck, Lydia. He stacked it himself." Silence on the line. Then a breath. "He's my husband. He's your mistake." She didn't argue. That told me enough. "What do you want me to do, Lydia? Forgive him? Let him keep the house? I can't." My voice cracked. I hated that it did, but I let it. If I stop now, he'll never pay. He'll never learn. He'll just do it again. To me, to you, to the next person who trusts him. "So this is revenge?" "No," I said, and this time I meant it. "It's a reckoning." She hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, the gossip was thicker than the spring mud. I heard it at the market, from the butcher who'd once given me extra cuts for free when Mom was sick. I heard it from the mailman who lingered too long at my door, eyes darting like he might catch the scent of scandal on my coat. And then the lawyer's letter came. It was a real suit this time. Ellis had scraped together just enough to hire someone with sharp teeth and an address in the city. I read the letter once, twice, 3 times. It claimed fraud, coercion, undue influence. It painted me as the manipulative sister, the bitter spinster who'd tricked her brother out of his rightful inheritance. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, the letter spread out like a map of old battlefields. I felt the burn in my chest, the hot flush that always came when Ellis tried to twist the truth so hard it might snap. I called my lawyer. Yes, I'd found one. A woman named Vera Dunn, who ran her practice out of a converted barn just outside of town. Vera had eyes like wet slate and a mouth that never bothered with pretty lies. When I told her about the letter, she chuckled. "Let him try. We have the mortgage, the tax liens. The forged signature you found on that first will draft. He's standing in a thunderstorm with an umbrella made of tissue paper." "He's dangerous, Vera." "So are you," she said, "and you've got the weather on your side." We filed our counterclaim within the week. I felt like I'd signed my name in frost instead of ink. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of glass shattering. My heart lurched up into my throat before my mind could catch up. I lay there in the dark, every nerve buzzing. Another window broke. This one closer. My living room. I slipped out of bed, bare feet cold on the floorboards. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and crept down the hallway. Each step felt like wading through wet cement. The living room window gaped open like a black wound. Glass shards glittered on the carpet. And there, in the center of the mess, sat a rock wrapped in newspaper. I picked it up, hands steady, the ink bleeding into my skin. No note. No message. Just the sound of retreating footsteps crunching across the gravel outside. I called the police. They came, took my statement, pretended to care. But I saw the way they looked at me, the Renfield girl, bringing her family drama into their quiet town. I wondered how long before they whispered about me too. When they left, I swept up the glass, boarded the window with an old sheet of plywood I found in the basement. I sat on the couch until dawn, the rock heavy in my lap. I turned it over and over, feeling the weight of every choice I'd made. The next morning, I found a spray-painted word on my door, Critcham CH. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as I scrubbed it clean. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I scraped until my knuckles bled, then bandaged them, and went to work like nothing happened. Inside, though, the cold grew deeper. I felt it settle in my bones, a slow freeze that made me sharper. Stronger. Ellis tried to corner me at the grocery store a week later. He looked thinner, his eyes sunken like a corpse that hadn't yet realized it was dead. He grabbed my arm near the checkout, his fingers digging into the bruise Lydia's words had left on my heart. "You think you've won, Margot? You think this is over?" I leaned close enough that the cashier couldn't hear. "It'll be over when you're out of that house, when your lies are public record, when you're exactly what you've always been, alone." His grip tightened. "You're destroying me." "No," I said. "You did that all by yourself." He let go. He stumbled back, mouth working like a fish gasping for air. I paid for my groceries, my hands steady, my face a mask. When I got home, I opened the safe under my bed. The papers were still there, every signature, every clause. The trust my father thought would trap me had become my blade. I felt my mother's ghost behind me again, her presence warm for the first time in months. "You did good, Margot," I whispered, just like I had the night I found the mortgage papers. "But you're not done yet." Because the house hadn't sold yet, the liens were still tangled. And Ellis still had enough venom in him to strike. I knew he'd find a way to claw back, to twist the law into his own weapon. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. When the first offer came in on the house, the real estate agent called me before he called Ellis. I met him in his office. A glass cube in a strip mall, the walls plastered with photos of smiling families standing in front of houses they'd mortgaged for 30 years. "Miss Renfield," he said, shaking my hand like he thought it might break. "This offer's solid, cash buyer, wants to close fast. Does Ellis know?" He hesitated. "He will, but the way the foreclosure's written—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Ellis didn't have a say anymore. I signed the acceptance that afternoon. I didn't think about the Christmases we'd spent in that house, the tree that scraped the living room ceiling, the fireplace we fought to hang stockings on when Dad was too drunk to help. I didn't think about my mother's piano, sold off years ago to pay for Dad's last bar tab. I thought about the girl I used to be, standing at the top of those stairs, listening to Ellis lie to my face about the will. And I thought about the woman I was now, pens scratching across the paper like a match, striking the edge of a matchbox. When the deal closed, I didn't tell anyone. I just stood on the sidewalk across the street one last time, watching the movers haul out box after box of Ellis's life. Lydia stood by the truck, arms folded across her chest, her face a mask I recognized too well. Too late to fix, too proud to break. Ellis didn't come outside. Not once. I wondered if he was watching from some dark window, his kingdom collapsing in cardboard boxes and broken promises. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I just turned away, boots crunching over the last of the melting snow. It was spring now, the earth was waking up again, thawing in slow, stubborn pulses. And somewhere deep in the soil, seeds cracked open, roots pushing through the frost. Some things survive the winter. Some things grow sharper because of it. I was one of those things. I didn't watch them drive away. By the time the moving truck's brake lights flickered down that muddy lane for the last time, I was already walking back to my truck, the spring wind whipping at the collar of my coat. The house was gone, the land was gone, the mortgage, the liens, settled, paid, folded into a bank account I would never touch, except to cover the taxes I owed and the lawyer's final invoice. Vera Dunn had insisted on handling the sale personally. She told me in that barn office that always smelled faintly of hay and printer toner that it was time to close the wound. But wounds don't close overnight. Not ones like ours. When I got back to my apartment, I sat on the narrow bed that dipped under my weight, the same one I'd slept on since I first fled that house. I opened the box of my mother's letters. The pages had gone soft at the folds, the ink fading where my fingers had traced it so many nights, searching for answers in her half-finished sentences and careful loops of penmanship. I read the same line over and over. I wish I'd been stronger for you, Margot. It was strange, feeling grief and triumph tangled together. I'd won. And yet I felt as if I'd buried something I could never name, some last link to the part of myself that still believed we could have been a family, if only Ellis had been a better man, if only Dad had been less cruel, if only Mom had lived. But there are no if-onlys in real life, only debts paid, only cold truths left behind like footprints in the thawing mud. I didn't see Lydia again, not at first. Rumor had it she'd moved back in with her sister in the next town over, some small place with quiet streets and no memory of the Renfields. Good for her, I thought. Maybe she'd finally find the version of herself she'd buried under Ellis's silk suits and forced smiles. Ellis, though. Ellis didn't disappear. For weeks, I'd catch glimpses of him in places that made my teeth ache with old memories. Once, I saw him outside the diner where our father used to take us when we were kids. Cheap burgers, salty fries, Dad's voice slurring threats across the ketchup-stained table. Ellis stood by the window, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes hollow. He didn't see me that time. Or maybe he pretended not to. The second time, I knew he wanted me to see him. I was leaving the library late. Budget cuts had trimmed our staff hours to the bone, so closing fell to me more nights than not. I'd turned the lock on the glass door when I felt the hair on my neck lift, that old animal sense I'd learned to trust since the day I'd sent him the first overdue notice. He leaned against the bus stop bench across the street, half lit by the flickering lamp overhead. He was thinner now, his shoulders hunched like a dog expecting the next kick. He didn't move when I stepped into the circle of light. "Margot," he called, voice scraping the quiet like a rusty blade. I didn't answer. I just crossed my arms and waited. He pushed off the bench, hands spread like he wanted to show me he wasn't a threat. The gesture would have made me laugh if my pulse wasn't pounding so loud in my ears. "You satisfied?" he asked. "You feel better now?" "Better than you," I said. "Why are you here, Ellis?" He laughed. A sad, shredded sound that made me think of the nights he'd sat on the porch steps, chain-smoking Dad's cigarettes, telling me stories about how he'd make us rich, how he'd fix everything once he was old enough to run away. "You could have let it go," he said, stepping closer. "You didn't have to destroy me." "I didn't destroy you," I shot back. "You did that yourself. I just stopped paying the cost." He flinched, like the words were bullets. For a moment, I saw a boy again, the brother who'd once pushed me on the rope, swing behind the barn, who'd held my hand the first time Dad's rage put me in the hospital. But that boy was dead. Maybe he'd never really existed. He shuffled a step closer. I smelled the cheap whiskey on his breath. "You always were good at pretending you're better than us." "No," I said, "just better than you." He lunged then, not with fists. He wasn't that direct anymore. His words were sharper than his hands would ever be. "You think you've won?" His voice trembled, half laugh, half sob. "You think you'll be free of me? You can own every house, every acre of land, every scrap of paper with my name on it. But you'll never own what matters. You'll never fix what you broke when you turned your back on family." I didn't flinch. I'd learned to stand still in the storm. "You broke that long before I did." He shook his head, wiping his mouth with the back of his sleeve like a child. "You're alone now, Margot. You'll always be alone." I didn't answer him. I turned my back, walked to my truck, let him stand there under that broken streetlight, with all his ghosts gnawing at his bones. I didn't look back. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table for hours. The rock from the broken window still sat on the counter, a reminder that victory has a cost. I turned it over and over, the cold weight grounding me when my mind threatened to drift into old shadows. In the days that followed, the calls stopped. The letters stopped. The gossip faded. But Ellis's words lingered like frostbite in my veins. You'll always be alone. I didn't want that to be true. But wanting and having were different beasts. My mother had taught me that, whether she meant to or not. So I got up every morning, I went to work. I rebuilt the budget for the children's reading program. I wrote grant applications late at night under the glow of my desk lamp. I lived. One rainy afternoon, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No stamp, no address. Just my name, scrawled in the frantic hand I knew better than my own. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I'm leaving town, I won't come back. I hope you're happy. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, the letter trembling in my hands. Relief and grief warred in my chest until I couldn't tell which would win. Maybe neither would. Ellis was gone. Or at least he said he was. I'd learned better than to trust his promises, but this one felt different, like a confession whispered to the dark when no one's listening. A week later, I saw Lydia again. She found me at the library, asked if I'd meet her at the diner, the same one where Ellis and I had once sat, side by side, carving our initials into the sticky wood of the booth. She looked better. Stronger somehow. She ordered black coffee, no cream, no sugar. She met my eyes without flinching. He's gone, she said. So I heard. She didn't ask me how I felt. Didn't pretend there was anything left to say about him. Instead, she slid an envelope across the table. I thought you should have this. Inside were photos, old ones. Mom in her garden, dirt under her fingernails, hair tied up in a ragged scarf. Me at 17, holding my diploma, standing between Ellis and Dad. Ellis's arm around my shoulders, his grin too wide to be real. Why? I asked. Because not everything he touched should rot, Lydia said. Some things you get to keep. She left before I could say thank you. Or, I'm sorry. Or I hope you find your own spring, wherever you go next. I stayed in that booth until my coffee went cold. Outside, the rain turned the streetlights into smears of gold and silver. The world felt softer than it had in months. When I got home, I put the photos in the box with Mom's letters. Then I opened the window above my bed, letting the damp wind wash through the room. Ellis's words would echo for a while, maybe forever, but so would my mother's. Don't be like them, but don't be weaks. I wasn't either of those things anymore. I was something new, something that could stand in the thaw and know the snow would come again, and I would survive it. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. I didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to find out. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the open window and let the spring rain tap out its quiet song on the sill. Some debts you pay with money, some you pay with blood, and some, like the one Ellis owed me, you pay with the part of yourself that can never quite forgive. But that's life, that's family, that's the frost and the thaw, and I was still here. Tomorrow would come, and I would be ready. The rain kept falling for days after Ellis's letter. It battered the windows of my little apartment like a drumbeat, steady, insistent, washing away the last grime of winter's bitterness. I'd wake at dawn and lie there listening, my eyes tracing the hairline cracks in the ceiling, while my mind wandered through the echo of his words. I won't come back. Promises, when they came from Ellis, were always made of paper. But this one felt heavier. Maybe because it wasn't a threat. Maybe because, for once, he'd run out of poison to spit. I thought his absence would feel like a room with the windows flung open. Fresh air, sunlight, freedom. But the first week without him was quiet, in a way I hadn't expected. I'd gotten so used to living with one ear tilted to the creak on the stairs, the hum of an unknown engine idling on my street, the heavy knock on my door. When it all stopped, the silence felt like a trap. I spent my evenings in the library's basement, sifting through the archives like I was digging for bones. Old tax records, deeds that had passed through my father's hands, newspaper clippings about the store opening in 1975, its slow collapse in the early 2000s. I found a photo of my mother in the town paper, standing on the sidewalk outside the shop, her arm looped through Dad's like she still believed he'd keep his promises. I clipped that photo out and slipped it into my pocket. When I got home, I added it to the box. It belonged with the letters, the yellowed snapshots, the ghost of the girl I'd been. The next morning, Vera called. She'd wrapped up the last scraps of the foreclosure, signed off on the final checks. She wanted to meet. Said she had something for me, something I'd earned, though she wouldn't say what it was over the phone. Her office sat on the edge of town, a weathered old barn that smelled of damp wood and clean paper. Vera greeted me with her usual sharp nod, pushing her glasses up her nose like she was about to cross-examine me for murder. "Sit," she said. "Tea?" I shook my head. I didn't trust my stomach with tea these days. She slid a folder across the table between us, heavy paper, her name and mine on the tab. Inside, crisp white pages covered in small print and the neat, brutal marks of her pen. "It's yours," she said. "What is?" "The store." I stared at her. "What?" She tapped the pages with her nail. "Your father's hardware store. It wasn't in the final will. Ellis overlooked the fact that the property taxes had never been settled. When the county auctioned the lien, no one touched it. So I did. For you." I laughed, sharp, startled. "Why? It's worthless. It's a broken old shack." Vera's smile was small and fierce. "It's the only thing he never got to ruin, and now you decide what happens to it. Sell it. Burn it to the ground. Rebuild it. But it's yours. No more ghosts." When I left her office, the folder felt heavier than any check I'd ever held. The keys were inside, a single brass ring tied to an old tag that read Renfield Hardware, back door. I drove out there that afternoon. The building stood on a lonely stretch of Main Street, 2 blocks from the library. Its windows were boarded up, but I could still see the faded letters above the door. Renfield and Sons. I stood on the cracked sidewalk for a long time, the spring breeze flicking my hair into my eyes. Asterisk and Sons. Dad had painted over the "and daughter" I'd added when I was 12. I'd done it in bright blue, proud as if it meant something. He'd called me inside, washed the paint off my fingers with a rag so rough it left scrapes. I walked around back. The rusted door groaned when I unlocked it, hinges screaming in protest. The inside smelled like old dust and oil. Shelves half collapsed under the weight of rotting boxes. A single light bulb swung from the ceiling, its glow weak but warm enough to show me the bones of the place. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but all I felt was a steady quiet in my chest, a heartbeat that finally matched the rhythm of my own name. For days I returned. I swept the floor, hauled out broken fixtures, rusted nails, splintered shelves. The work blistered my hands, smeared my clothes with grease and dirt. Some nights I'd fall asleep with splinters still lodged under my fingernails, the ache in my muscles, a reminder that I wasn't done yet. Word spread, as it always did. One morning, a boy from the high school showed up at the back door. He held out a toolbox, his father's old set, and asked if I needed help fixing the roof. Then a woman I barely remembered from church knocked on the plywood I'd hammered over the broken windows. She said she used to shop here with her husband before he died, asked if I wanted the old neon sign she'd salvaged when they'd torn down the diner on 5th. People came, one by one. Not because they pitied me, though I could see that spark of curiosity too. They came because they'd watched Ellis devour everything he touched, and they wanted to see what happened when a Renfield built something instead of tearing it apart. Some days I still felt him, his shadow lingering in the corners where the old register used to sit, the place he'd skimmed every extra dollar he could. But each time I scraped a brush of fresh paint across the walls, I felt the ghosts slip back into the wood. The night I hung the new sign above the front door, I stood on the sidewalk until my fingers went numb. The letters glowed soft and steady in the streetlight. Renfield and Company *. No sons, no daughters. Just me. The first customer came 2 weeks later. A man with mud on his boots, a cracked shovel slung over his shoulder. He asked for nails and a new handle, and when I rung him up, he dropped a single dollar more than the price on the counter. "For luck," he said, tipping his cap. I didn't need luck, but I took it anyway. Nights were the hardest. When the shop lights went out and the street fell quiet again, I'd sit behind the old counter, my mother's letters spread out like maps I still hadn't finished reading. I'd run my fingers over the paper, the same way I'd run them over the deed to the mortgage, the lien documents, every line that proved I'd survived him. I wondered if Ellis ever thought about this place. If, wherever he'd run to, he pictured me behind that counter, sweeping the dust he'd left behind. I didn't hate him anymore. Not really. Hate took energy. What I felt now was closer to pity, mixed with a relief so sharp it still made my breath hitch in the dark. One night I dreamed he came back. He stood in the doorway of the shop, older, thinner, his eyes hollow as an abandoned well. He didn't speak. He just looked around at the clean walls, the shelves stocked with things that made life easier. A new bolt, a fresh coat of paint, a sturdy lock. Things that held things together. In the dream, I turned away from him and flipped the closed sign. When I woke, the image lingered like frost on a window, delicate but impossible to keep. Spring bled into summer. The store became mine in every way that mattered. I knew the creak of the floorboards in the back aisle, the hum of the neon sign in the dark, the way the sun hit the front windows just before closing. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass, hair tied up, flannel shirt streaked with paint, a smudge of oil on my cheek, and I wouldn't recognize the woman staring back. And then, slowly, I did. One evening, Lydia came by. She stood outside for a long time before she pushed open the door. She looked better. Her hair shorter, her clothes plainer, but her eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. "This place," she said, turning in a slow circle. "It feels different." "It is." She set a small envelope on the counter. "He sent this, from wherever he is." Inside, a check. Small, laughably small, compared to what he'd stolen. And a single line in his spidery handwriting. "For the store. Don't say I never gave you anything." I almost laughed. Almost. I looked up at Lydia. "Are you okay?" She shrugged. "Better without him. Maybe you were right all along." "Not right," I said. "Just tired of being wrong." She smiled, and it looked real this time. "If you ever sell nails, I need some for my new fence. You know where to find me." After she left, I held that check between my fingers until the ink blurred. Then I tore it up and fed it piece by piece into the old wood stove in the back room. Ellis's final offering turned to ash. By autumn, the store was turning a profit, small, steady, honest. I'd see new faces every week, farmers, old couples, kids looking for summer job hours. Each of them walked out with something small that might hold their lives together for another season. Sometimes, at closing time, I'd sit on the front steps, my mother's letters in my lap, the last of the evening light spilling across the floorboards inside. No frost, no fire, just me, and the world I'd carved from the ruin he left behind. And in that quiet, I finally believed it. Ellis was gone. His shadow, his lies, his debts. And in their place, something new grew in the cracks he'd left. Something strong enough to survive the next winter. And the next. And all the winters after that. I used to think ghosts were the worst thing you could find in an empty building. Turns out, ghosts are easy. They linger in corners, they whisper when the wind moves right. But they don't touch you unless you invite them in. The real monsters are the debts that live in your marrow. The ones that speak in your own voice when the lights go out. By winter, the hardware store had become more than just a place to sell nails and paint cans. It became my witness stand, my confessional. Each customer carried a piece of my family's name on the receipt, and each dollar earned was like rewriting the history Ellis had tried so hard to bury. It didn't happen overnight. Some days I'd still come home and find an envelope tucked under my door. Anonymous, threatening, petty. A single word, traitor. Or worse, family. That one always made my hands go cold. Ellis might have left town, but his rot clung to the roots of this place like mildew on wet beams. But I stayed open. Every morning I flipped the open sign with the same steady hand that once signed the foreclosure papers. I learned how to patch a leak in the back roof myself, learned the difference between copper and galvanized pipes, learned that a hardware store in a dying town won't make you rich, but it might make you honest. Sometimes, late at night, I'd walk the aisles, humming to myself. I'd imagine my mother sitting behind the old counter, her ledger open, her pen scratching numbers she could never quite balance. I'd see Ellis at 17, leaning against the doorframe, charm turned up so high it masked the stench of his lies. I'd tell them both the same thing. Look what I built from the pieces you left me. One December evening, I got a letter. Not the kind Ellis used to send. No threat, no insult, just a simple cream envelope with my name in blocky, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a Christmas card, the cheap kind you buy in bulk at the gas station. And inside that, a note. Saw the store was open again. Glad someone cares. Your mother would be proud. No signature, no return address. Just that. I read it 3 times. The words swimming under my fingertips like they might drift away if I didn't anchor them. I pinned that card above the register, right next to my mother's photo. When people asked, I'd say it was from an old friend. That wasn't a lie. Not really. That winter was the first in years that didn't feel like punishment. The snow came soft and thick, piling on the roof like a blessing instead of a threat. The town seemed to lean into the season, windows lit with fairy lights, wreaths on every door. Even the library, my second home, looked brighter somehow, as if the shadows had decided to leave me be for a while. One night, close to Christmas, I closed the shop early. I left the open sign, flipped to closed, but didn't lock the door behind me. I sat behind the counter with a cup of tea gone lukewarm in my hands, the faint sound of carolers drifting through the walls. I thought of Ellis, of Lydia, of the house I'd torn out from under him like a rotten tooth. I wondered if he'd kept his promise to stay away. I wondered if I'd ever forgive myself for not caring more if he hadn't. Sometime after midnight I stood up, pulled on my coat, locked the door tight this time, and as I stepped out into the crisp dark, I realized I hadn't once thought about the mortgage, or the will, or the box of letters gathering dust on my shelf. Freedom is a strange, fragile thing. It doesn't roar, it whispers. And that night the whisper said, "You did what you had to do. Now do something better." The new year brought more customers. Word spread that I'd order anything a neighbor needed. No markup, no fuss. The local contractor started sending his guys to me for supplies instead of driving to the city. Kids came by after school to sweep the floors or stock the nails, asking me for stories about the old days when this place had belonged to my father. I told them the truth. Not the pretty version Ellis used to tell, but the one I'd earned the right to own. In early March, a woman came through the door who looked like spring wrapped in a thrift store coat. She had hair that curled around her cheeks when the wind caught it, eyes sharp enough to pin me in place before I even managed to say hello. "You, Margot?" she asked. "I am." She extended a hand. "Lena, I'm with the Historical Society." I almost laughed. I thought the Historical Society was just old church ladies gossiping about who painted their shutters the wrong color. She grinned, teeth bright in the cold light. "Sometimes it is, but we also care about keeping the past from rotting into the ground." She told me they wanted to list the store on the local register. Not because it was grand or fancy, but because it was one of the last pieces of Main Street that hadn't been bulldozed for condos or strip malls. I didn't know whether to be flattered or suspicious. "What's that mean for me?" I asked. "Means you get a plaque," she said, "and a line in the town guide. Maybe a few tax breaks if you play your cards right." And what does it cost? She shrugged. Nothing, if you don't mind people remembering this place belonged to the Renfields. I looked around the shop then, at the new shelves, the neat rows of bins, the sign over the door that no longer said Asterisk and Sons. The ghosts were quieter now. They could stay. I'd made my peace with that. Fine, I said. Put up your plaque. She smiled, wrote something in her notebook, and promised she'd be in touch. That night, I walked home under the thawing sky. Puddles shone like black glass in the streetlights, reflecting back pieces of myself I'd thought I'd lost forever. When I got home, I opened my mother's box. Not to read, not to mourn. Just to hold the paper in my hands, to remember how far I'd come since the day I learned what Ellis had done. I whispered into the quiet. You were right, Mom. He couldn't stop me, and for the first time I believed she heard me. I fell asleep with the letters stacked neatly by my bedside, the future no longer a threat, but a door I'd already stepped through. Spring arrived early that year. Or maybe it just felt early because my bones were finally warm again. The thaw crept in overnight, melting the last dirty snowbanks into trickles that ran down the gutter outside the store. People joked about mud season like it was a curse, but for me, it was a promise that what's buried can come up green if you're patient enough. The new Renfield & Company sign caught the morning light every day as I turned the key in the front door. I liked the sound of that. Company. It wasn't just me anymore. Some days I'd catch myself humming as I swept the floor. Other days I'd stand behind the counter, pen tapping against the old ledgers, wondering if my mother ever dared dream this place could be hers alone one day. And then there was the plaque. Lena from the Historical Society brought it over in late April, wrapped in brown paper like a gift. She was beaming when she set it on my counter. One of the oldest continuously operating businesses in the county, she said proudly. Did you know that? Not until you told me, I said. I'm guessing you want me to hang this out front? Right next to the door. So everyone knows the story. Kuto wa sori. Funny how people love a pretty version of the past, scrubbed clean of the blood and betrayal that made it. I thought of Ellis then, wherever he was. I wondered if he'd feel the sting if he ever came back and saw his family name turned into something that couldn't be stolen. Thanks, Lena, I said, for caring about this place. She smiled at me like she knew more than she let on. Sometimes the past just needs the right hands to hold it together. After she left, I hung the plaque myself. I stood back, wiping the dust off my palms, and for the first time I didn't feel the old ache behind my ribs when I looked at that name. The ghosts would have to find somewhere else to live now. A few days later, Lydia came by again. She had a new haircut, shorter, sharp at the ends like she'd snipped away every string Ellis had tangled around her. How's the fence? I asked, pouring her a cup of coffee from the thermos I kept behind the counter. She sipped it slowly, looking around the store like she might catch the walls whispering secrets. Sturdy? She said. It's good to build something that keeps people out for a change. Or in, I said. We both laughed. An easy, brittle sound that broke the ice we'd packed between us for years. She didn't talk about Ellis, and I didn't ask. Some wounds heal better in silence. May turned to June, and the town leaned into its short, sweet summer with a kind of desperation I understood too well. Everyone wanted to believe the thaw would last forever. But I'd learned, the frost always comes back. The trick was learning how to stand in it without letting it break you. One Saturday, I stayed late at the store to finish inventory. I was deep in the back room, counting boxes of nails that all looked the same until you tried to use the wrong one, when I heard the front door creak open. We're closed, I called out automatically. Silence. I set the box down, wiped my hands on my jeans, and stepped into the aisle. The light at the front cast long shadows that made the store look bigger than it was. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Old buildings groan and settle, even when you're not there to hear them. Then a voice drifted from the doorway. Margot. I froze. The name tasted like rust in my mouth. It wasn't Ellis's voice. Too soft, too unsure, but it carried the same echo, like a note struck on a piano you haven't tuned in years. A boy stood there, maybe 20, 21. Skinny, hair too long, sleeves pushed up to his elbows to show the angry, fresh tattoos that wound around his forearms. His eyes. God, his eyes were familiar. My brother's eyes, but young, unruined. Not yet. "Can I help you?" I managed. He stepped forward, boots leaving muddy prints on the clean floor. "I'm sorry. This is gonna sound crazy. I'm looking for Ellis Renfield." My heart slammed so hard I thought it might crack a rib. "He's not here. He's not been here for a long time." The kid swallowed, shoulders sagging like I'd punched the wind out of him. "Figures. I tried his old address. They said he sold it." "Who are you?" He didn't answer at first. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture so like Ellis that I had to grip the counter to steady myself. "My name's Jamie," he said. He's my dad, or was." It felt like the room tilted under my feet. I remembered Lydia's tight smiles, the late-night calls that went unanswered, the trips Ellis made for business that never made sense. My brother's secrets had always grown like weeds. Why would he stop planting them when he left town? "How did you find me?" I asked. Jamie shrugged, his mouth pulling into a grimace that wasn't quite a smile. "Google. An old neighbor said if anyone knew where Ellis was, it'd be his sister." I barked out a laugh that tasted like old vinegar. "You'd think. But I haven't heard from him in years." Jamie shifted from foot to foot, his eyes drifting to the shelves lined with the tools of small, honest labor. Hammers, screws, light bulbs. Things you buy to fix what's broken. "I don't want anything," he said quickly. "Not money, not help. I don't know." He told my mom stories about this place. Said he'd bring me here someday. "And did he?" Jamie shook his head. "He left when I was 7, showed up again when I was 15, full of promises. And then gone again." I felt something old and sharp twist inside me. That sounds like Ellis. He looked at me then. Really looked. And I saw it, clear as day. The part of my brother that still lived on, flickering behind this boy's tired eyes. "What do you want, Jamie?" I asked softer now. He stared at the counter. Just to know who he was, what he did. I glanced around the store, at the plaque, the sign, the clean shelves that used to hold the weight of our family's lies. I thought about all the things I could say. How Ellis had stolen from me, from our parents, from himself. How he'd buried me under his debts and tried to drown me in his rage. But the truth was more complicated than that. And Jamie deserved more than the ashes. So I gestured to the stool behind the counter. "Sit down. I'll tell you a story." He did. And I told him the truth, the whole jagged, imperfect truth. I told him about my mother's letters, about the trust hidden in the mortgage, about the night I reclaimed what Ellis had stolen. I didn't spare the ugly parts. I didn't pretend the wounds had all healed clean. When I finished, Jamie's eyes were rimmed red. He didn't wipe the tears away. "So he really was." "Both," I said. "Good and bad, broken and cruel. He was my brother. That's all." We sat there for a long time, the sound of the wind rattling the front door. Finally, Jamie stood. He looked older somehow, like the pieces of himself that had never fit were settling into place. "Thanks," he said, "for telling me." "What will you do now?" He shrugged. "Keep moving, I guess. I'm good at that." I stepped around the counter and pulled an old key from my pocket, the one that unlocked the shed out back, where my father kept the things that didn't fit inside. I pressed it into Jamie's hand. "If you ever want to build something instead of running," I said, "come back. There's room here for more than ghosts." He held the key like it might burn him. But he didn't let go. When he left, I watched his shadow drift down Main Street, swallowed by the last glow of the streetlights. For a moment, I could almost see Ellis beside him, hand on his shoulder, whispering the same promises he'd once made to me. But the door stayed shut. The wind stayed outside. And inside, the store hummed with the quiet promise I'd built from broken boards and splintered lies. Some debts pass on like blood. Some debts you choose to forgive before they poison you for good. And some stories, like the story of Ellis Renfield, aren't finished, even when you think you've buried them. I locked up for the night. The plaque caught the light of my phone's flashlight as I turned away from the door. Asterisk. One of the oldest continuously operating businesses in the county, and now, maybe, one of the truest. I slipped my mother's letters from my pocket and tucked them under the cash register. Not as a weight, not anymore, but as a reminder. Some roots run deep enough to survive any frost. Tomorrow, I'd open the door again. I'd flip the sign. And maybe, just maybe, I'd keep the light on for the next lost Renfield who needed to come home. The key Jamie took from my hand haunted me more than any of Ellis's threats ever had. In the quiet hours after he left, I replayed our conversation 100 times, each version reshaping my memory of my brother. It was strange, how the boy's face softened the edges of my anger, like seeing a ghost through new eyes. I didn't expect him to come back. I told myself that was for the best. Jamie had his own road to walk, same as I did, once. But part of me couldn't help imagining him pushing open the door one rainy afternoon, coat dripping, asking for a job. A way to make his hands as rough and capable as mine. The shed key stayed missing for days. I half wondered if I'd see the padlock swinging open one morning, Jamie inside, picking through the dusty tools my father had stashed there decades ago. But the door stayed locked, the building quiet, the ghosts content to keep their secrets. Summer settled in like a blessing. The days stretched long and hot, the hardware store's old fans clicking their blades lazily overhead while customers tracked gravel dust across the floor. I didn't mind. Dirt meant work, and work meant life. That was something Ellis never understood. He liked the shine of effort, but not the sweat that made it. Every so often, I'd see Lydia. She'd stop by with a tin of cookies she swore she hadn't baked herself, asking if the new roof I'd ordered for the shed had come in yet. She never said Ellis's name. I never asked if she missed him. It felt good to stand with her in that aisle, comparing prices on paint swatches, pretending we were just two women with no history but fresh brushstrokes on old walls. One Saturday in late July, I closed the store early and walked the block to the little cafe next to the library. The place used to be an ice cream parlor when Ellis and I were kids. We'd spend our nickels on single scoops, feet swinging from the red vinyl stools while we dreamed up ways to escape this town. Now it was all reclaimed wood and overpriced coffee. I didn't mind. I liked the way it smelled, like burnt sugar and bitter beans. I liked the soft clink of cups on saucers, the buzz of quiet conversation that felt nothing like the sharp whispers our family name used to draw. I sat by the window, notebook open, pen tapping against the paper. I'd been keeping lists, suppliers, back orders, ideas for what to do with the empty space above the shop. For the first time, the future felt like something I could write, line by line. Halfway through my coffee, the bell above the door jingled. I didn't look up until a shadow fell across my table. "You always this easy to find?" Jamie's voice was rough, but lighter than the first time. He looked the same, shaggy hair, too thin jacket for the summer heat, but his eyes were steadier. "Depends who's looking," I said, flipping my notebook closed. He dropped into the chair opposite me, elbows on the table. "You said to come back if I wanted to build something." "And do you?" He shrugged, mouth tugging sideways. "Better than the other option." "What's that?" "Running," he said simply. "Stealing. Wasting what he left me." I studied him. His bitten nails, the way he tapped his foot under the table like he was bracing to bolt. Ellis was in there, no doubt. But so was something softer. Maybe from his mother, whoever she'd been. "The shed's yours to clean out," I said. "But don't expect me to pay you for leaning on a broom." "Didn't ask for charity." "Good," I said. "I'm fresh out." He grinned then, and I saw my brother again, flickering, quicksilver. But it didn't scare me the way it used to. He showed up the next morning, bright and early, carrying a dented thermos of coffee like a peace offering. Together we swung open the shed doors for the first time in years. The air inside smelled like motor oil and old wood. Sunlight poured through the crack in the roof, lighting up the dust motes like they were fireflies. Jamie whistled low. "Looks like hell." "Looks like a start," I corrected. He glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "You really believe that?" "I have to," I said. "Otherwise, all of this," I gestured to the store, the plaque, the swept floors, "is just a prettier grave." We worked in silence for hours. He found a box of receipts from the 80s, yellowed and brittle. I found my father's old hammer, initials carved into the handle, WEW. I ran my thumb over the grooves until the splinters bit my skin. Not enough to hurt, just enough to remember. By noon, we'd cleared a path through the clutter. Jamie wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm, leaving a streak of grime on his temple. "Why'd you keep all this?" he asked. "Because once," I said, "it was all I had left of him." He didn't flinch at the bitterness in my voice. "And now?" "Now it's just junk," I said. "Or it's kindling. Depends what you do with it." He nodded, eyes flicking around the shed like he could already see the bones of something new inside the rot. That night, I found a scrap of paper wedged under the cash register when I closed up. Jamie's handwriting, shaky but clear. "Thanks for the chance. Don't know what I'm doing yet. But I'll show up." It was more than Ellis ever gave me. More than he ever gave Jamie, too. August baked the town dry. Heat rose in waves off the asphalt, shimmering like a mirage that might swallow us whole. But inside the store, the air was cool, and the shelves well-stocked. I found myself smiling more, even laughing when Jamie cracked jokes while hammering new shelves into place in the shed. One evening, we stood outside after closing, leaning against the railing, watching the sun slip behind the library's old stone facade. "You think he's dead?" Jamie asked out of nowhere. I didn't have to ask who he meant. "Ellis?" "No, not yet." "Would it be better if he was?" I thought about that, really thought. About how many nights I'd dreamed of him gone. Erased, erased, erased. How many mornings I'd woken to the weight of him still pressing down on my ribs. "No," I said finally. "If he's alive, he still has to live with what he did. That's enough." Jamie didn't say anything. He just nodded, his eyes on the horizon like he was watching for a ghost that might never come home. We didn't talk about him again after that. We didn't have to. September brought rain, thick, pounding storms that rattled the tin roof of the shed and washed the last of the summer dust off Main Street. The nights grew longer, the days cooler, the store busier than ever as people came in looking for tools to fix what the storms had broken. Sometimes I'd find Jamie asleep on the old cot I'd dragged into the back room. He'd be curled up like a kid, the key I'd given him still on a chain around his neck. I never woke him. I'd just cover him with the spare blanket, turn out the light, and lock the door behind me. One night, as I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, I opened my mother's letters again. But this time, I didn't read them for answers. I read them like a map of places I'd already survived. I'd traced the loops of her handwriting and wondered if she'd forgive me for what I'd done. For what I'd taken. For what I'd rebuilt. Maybe she already had. Inside, the shed light glowed warm through the rain. Jamie's laughter drifted through the walls, mingling with the soft hum of the old radio I'd given him. I sipped my tea, feeling the frost in my veins melt just a little more. Some debts can never be repaid. Some stories never truly end. But some nights, when the thunder rolls and the ghosts stay quiet, I believe that's exactly how it should be. Tomorrow, I'd unlock the door again. Jamie would show up with his coffee and his nervous jokes. We'd sort through the old nails and bent hinges, dreaming up what we could make from rust and ruin. And when the snow came again, and it always did, I'd be ready. I'd built my roots deep. I'd built them to hold. I always thought the first snow would come like an old threat, creeping in under the eaves and settling in the cracks between my bones the way Ellis's voice once did. But when it came that year, Early in October, it felt like a benediction instead. Jamie was the one who noticed it first. We were standing in the shed, half buried in boxes of scrap wood we'd promised ourselves we'd sort by Thanksgiving. He glanced up through the cracked window pane, mouth open just enough to catch the stray flakes drifting down. "Look at that," he said, his breath fogging the glass. "You think it's gonna stick?" "Probably," I said, brushing sawdust off my palms. "It always does." He turned to look at me, one eyebrow arched like he was measuring my mood. "You hate winter, don't you?" "Not anymore," I said. And I meant it. He smiled, and I caught a glimpse of Ellis in the curl of his lip. But the resemblance didn't hollow me out the way it used to. Maybe because Jamie's eyes were clearer, unclouded by old grudges and the poison our father had poured into us. By the time we closed up that night, the snow was a thin crust over the sidewalks. I flipped the open sign to "closed," locking the door while Jamie swept the floor. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the sharp tang of pine from the new shelves he'd built with offcuts from the shed. "You ever think you'd get this back?" Jamie asked, leaning the broom against the counter. "No," I said, "and not like this." "Like what?" "Like it's mine," I said. "Truly mine. Not something borrowed or stolen. Not something held together by someone else's promises." He nodded, like he understood. And maybe he did. Some nights he'd stay late after we locked up, running his fingers over the old ledgers, asking questions about our family. He never said Ellis's name if he could help it. Neither did I. Some ghosts are better left outside in the cold. One evening, I found him out back, standing under the falling snow, the shed door wide open behind him. He was staring up at the dark sky, flakes settling on his hair and shoulders, melting into the ink of the tattoos that wound down his arms. "You're gonna freeze," I said from the doorway. "Probably," he said, not moving. "But it's quiet out here." "It's quiet inside too," I said, "if you know how to listen." He turned to me, eyes bright in the half-light. "You ever think you'd forgive him?" It was a question we'd both been asking in different ways since the day he walked through my door. "No," I said. "And some nights, I still don't." He nodded, like that was enough. "I don't either, but I'm trying." I stepped into the snow, boots crunching over the drift by the shed. I stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, looking up at the sky that stretched wider than any secret Ellis had ever kept. "Trying's all there is," I said. "It's enough." When we went back inside, I poured us both mugs of tea. He drank his with too much sugar, wincing at every sip like he was bracing for the burn. We sat in the back room, surrounded by boxes of receipts and leftover stock, the hiss of the old radiator filling the silence between us. "You know," Jamie said after a while, "my mom used to say snow was the world's way of covering up its sins." "Your mom was smarter than she knew," I said. "But sometimes, what's buried comes back up when the thaw comes." He laughed, a rough, honest sound that chased the last chill out of the corners of the room. The next morning, I found him asleep on the cot again, my father's hammer clutched in his hand like a totem. I pulled the blanket higher around his shoulders before I unlocked the door and flipped the sign to "Open." Winter settled in hard. Storms rolled in off the lake, coating the shop's old windows in frost that caught the light like shards of glass. The heat in the back room went out twice, and both times Jamie crawled under the counter to fix the pipes himself. I'd bring him mugs of hot coffee, watching his breath rise in plumes as he muttered curses that would have made Ellis laugh. We spent Christmas Eve together. The store closed early, no last-minute customers braving the snowdrifts that piled waist-high against the front steps. Jamie dragged in a scrawny pine tree from the lot down the street, needles scattering like confetti across the floor. "You know this is ridiculous," I said, untangling a string of lights that hadn't seen daylight since my mother was alive. "Yeah," he said. "That's the point." We stood it in the corner, crooked as a bad tooth. But when we plugged in the lights, they glowed soft and warm, throwing shadows on the walls that felt like something close to hope. "Merry Christmas, Margot," Jamie said when we locked up for the night. "Merry Christmas, kid," I said. And when he hugged me, I let him. Because sometimes, you have to let the new roots tangle where they will. January came in like a hammer. Pipes burst 2 days before New Year's, flooding the back hallway until the water threatened to swallow the new flooring Jamie had worked so hard to lay. We spent hours bailing it out with buckets, teeth chattering, laughing when the water sloshed over our boots. When it was over, when the pipes were patched and the floor mostly dry, Jamie sat cross-legged on the counter, arms wrapped around his knees. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. "Every day," I said. And then I remember no one else knows how to hold it together like I do. "Yeah," he said, "that's what I'm afraid of." I tossed him a rag to mop up the last puddles. "Then learn." By February, the town started whispering about us. Some said I'd taken him in like charity. Others claimed he was Ellis's revenge, come back to drain me dry. But I knew better. So did Jamie. We let them talk. Small towns thrive on small truths, twisted into big lies. One bitter afternoon, I caught him standing in front of the old Renfield and Son sign I'd propped in the shed. He was tracing the faded letters with his fingertips, the same way I used to trace my mother's signature on the lease papers. "You could change it," he said, not looking at me. "Change what?" "The name. Put yours up there. Forget his." I stood beside him, watching my breath fog in the half-light. "It's not just his name, it's mine too. Doesn't it hurt to see it every day?" "It used to," I said. "But now it's proof that I'm still here, that he didn't win." He let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "You're a lot tougher than he ever was." "So are you," I said, and for the first time, I saw him believe it. When the thaw finally came, it came overnight. Snow melted into rivers that ran down Main Street, clearing the grit and salt from the sidewalks, washing the last of winter's bitterness into the storm drains. We opened the windows in the store, letting the cold air chase out months of stale heat and unspoken words. Jamie propped open the shed doors and dragged the old sign into the yard, sanding it down until the splintered edges smoothed under his palm. "You gonna repaint it?" I asked from the doorway. He grinned, sweat streaking the dirt on his forehead. "We're gonna repaint it," he said. I laughed, the sound of it startling a pair of crows perched on the fence. They took off into the bright blue sky, cawing like they had secrets to keep. Some nights, when the store was quiet and the streets were dark, I'd sit in the back room and watch Jamie sleep on the cot. The hammer still rested on the shelf above his head, a reminder of where we came from, of what we'd survived. I'd think about Ellis then. About the house he lost, the lies he spun, the ghosts he left behind. I wondered if he'd ever stand in front of a window somewhere far away, watching the snow fall and remembering the sister he couldn't break. I hoped he did. Spring doesn't last long here. The frost always comes back. But so does the thaw. And every year, I feel it seep deeper into my bones, loosening the grip of old debts and colder memories. This store, this shed, this crooked sign with my family's name, they're not graves anymore. They're seeds. And I'll plant them over and over, until the roots run too deep for any winter to kill. Jamie will stay, or he won't. He'll build something new, or he'll run when the frost comes again. That's his choice, just like it was mine. But tonight, I'll lock up. I'll flip the sign to closed. I'll stand on the front steps, breathe in the soft hush of a town that no longer whispers my name like a curse. And tomorrow, when the morning comes, I'll open the door again, and the next day, and the next. Because some stories aren't about winning or losing. Some stories are about standing where you are, no matter how cold the ground gets beneath your feet. Some stories are about staying. And I'm still here. The spring storms rolled in thick that year. Sheets of rain that hammered the tin roof of the store until the sound filled every corner like a heartbeat. I'd stand behind the counter, fingers drumming the old wood, listening to the rhythm and thinking about all the storms that had come before it. Jamie worked in the shed through the worst of it, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sawdust clinging to his hair like pale frost. He built shelves I hadn't asked for, sanded every piece of scrap lumber until it gleamed under the single hanging bulb. Some nights I'd catch him tracing the outline of the old Renfield and Son sign with his thumb, like he was trying to feel the past instead of read it. "Why do you keep that thing?" he asked once, eyes squinting at the faded letters. "Why not burn it?" I shrugged, wiping grease from my palms. "Because burning it doesn't change it. Fixing what it left behind does." Jamie rolled his eyes but didn't argue. He knew what that sign meant to me now, how it was the last piece of the debt I'd buried Ellis with, and the first piece of something new we were trying to build. One afternoon in late May, we opened all the windows to air the place out. The smell of wet earth drifted in, tangled with the scent of fresh paint and old oil. Jamie perched on the counter, boots dangling, his hair damp from the drizzle outside. "You ever wish you'd left with him?" he asked. "When you were younger, I mean." I didn't look up from the ledger. "With Ellis?" "No." "You're sure?" I set the pen down, the ink smearing where it touched the fresh paper. "I'm sure. He'd have drowned me before he let me swim." Jamie nodded like he already knew the answer. Maybe he did. He'd lived his own version of Ellis's wreckage. Different shape, same rot. Summer snuck up on us while we weren't looking. The rain eased off, leaving behind bright days that baked the sidewalks and made the shed feel like an oven. Customers came and went, with their stories, their worries, their small-town secrets. I became part therapist, part supplier, part keeper of the past they all pretended to forget. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find Jamie asleep in the shed. He'd curl up on a stack of old drop cloths, my father's hammer resting beside him like a relic he couldn't quite let go of. I never woke him. I'd just stand in the doorway, listening to the soft rasp of his breath and the gentle creak of the walls as the wind moved through the boards. One night he stirred and cracked an eye open. "You always stand there like a ghost?" "Just making sure you're not dead," I said. "Not yet," he mumbled, rolling over. I left him there, the hammer catching the moonlight like a promise. By mid-June, word spread that the county planned to repave Main Street. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. New pavement meant tearing up old pipes. New sidewalks meant tearing out old steps. It meant dust and mud tracked into my clean floors. Men with clipboards measuring what they thought they owned. When the first crew showed up, I stood on the front steps, arms crossed, watching them stake neon flags in the dirt. "You the owner?" one of them asked. "I am." "Historic building, right?" "That's what the plaque says." He gave me a tight smile. "Shouldn't be a problem then. We'll be careful." Careful. I'd heard that word before. From Ellis, from the bank, from every man who'd ever promised not to break what I'd built. It never meant what they thought it did. Inside, Jamie was sorting bolts into glass jars we'd salvaged from a farm auction. He looked up when I slammed the door behind me. "Trouble?" he asked. "Nothing I can't handle," he smirked, that same Ellis curl in the corner of his mouth. "That's what you said about the pipes last winter." "And we handled it." He held up his palms, nicked and scarred from work. "Yeah, we did." The roadwork started the next week. They dug up the street in front of the shop, jackhammers rattling the windows until the glass threatened to pop free. Dust coated the sign, the windowsills, the rows of new paint cans Jamie had stacked so neatly by the front door. One morning, I caught him out there before sunrise, hosing down the pavement where the crews had left a mess. His breath smoked in the cool dawn air, his boots splattered with mud. "You know they'll just tear it up again tomorrow," I called from the doorway. He shrugged, water splashing over his boots. "Doesn't mean I have to live in their dirt today." I made him coffee, black and too strong. We drank it on the steps, watching the sun claw its way over the library roof across the street. For a moment, it felt like we were the only people awake in the whole town. "You think they'll finish before the frost comes?" Jamie asked. I looked at the trenches carved into the road, the piles of gravel waiting to swallow the past whole. "Doesn't matter. We'll still be here when they're gone." "Damn right," he said, and we clinked our mugs together like soldiers in a war we'd already won. The summer wore on like that, dust and noise and the slow, steady heartbeat of the shop keeping time with the jackhammers outside. Some nights I'd close the register, balance the books, and catch Jamie leaning in the doorway, watching the street like he was waiting for Ellis's ghost to appear at the edge of the new asphalt. "He's not coming back," I said once. "I know," Jamie said. "But if he does, then he'll see what we built from what he left us." Jamie didn't say anything to that. He just smiled, and I saw something unbroken in him for the first time. By August, the street was done. New blacktop shining under the late sun, sidewalks wide and clean. The steps out front were chipped, the paint on the railing peeling where the crews had scraped it with their machines. Jamie painted them fresh on a Sunday morning while I restocked the shelves. When he finished, he sat beside me on the floor, paint flecks clinging to his hair like confetti. "You ever think about selling this place?" he asked. I leaned back against the shelf, arms draped over my knees. "Why? You planning to buy it?" He barked out a laugh. "Not yet. But maybe someday." I looked around at the rows of screws and nails, the old counter polished smooth by decades of elbows and dreams. "If I ever sell, it'll be to someone who knows how deep the roots run." "Roots?" he repeated, rolling the word around like a marble in his mouth. "Funny. Never thought of this place like that." "It's all roots, Jamie. Everything that survives the frost is." Outside, the new road hummed with the passing trucks and cars, fresh lines painted over a past that would never quite stay buried. Some nights I still dreamed of Ellis. I'd see him standing in the doorway, hair slicked back, that fox smile sharp as glass. But in the dream, I never flinched anymore. I'd stand behind the counter, my hands spread on the wood, and tell him, "Bonois brands, livedi, Monois brands, livedi, Nuxwaffer over, Bonois, livedi, Nuxwaffer, livedi, Risbranzos scroes, no noisos scroes, pompoints, e weft." And every time, I woke up, with the sound of the shed door swinging open in the wind, Jamie's hammer tapping like a heartbeat in the dark. The frost would come again, the snow piling up against the windows until the world looked clean. But inside, the heat would hold, the roots would stay, and we'd keep building. When the first leaves turned, they fell like soft warnings on the new pavement outside Renfield and Company. I swept them off the steps every morning, just like I used to shovel the snow off our old porch when Ellis was still too busy sleeping off our father's whiskey to lift a finger. Some habits root themselves so deep you don't realize they're holding you up. Jamie whistled as he worked in the shed that fall, a low, tuneless sound that rose and fell with the rhythm of his hammer. Sometimes, in the quiet just before dusk, I'd stand at the back window and watch him measure and cut and sand the same plank 3 times before he'd let it fit. He was nothing like Ellis, and yet, sometimes when the light caught his face just right, I'd see that same fox grin, sharp and unrepentant. The difference was Jamie wore it without malice, like a promise he'd keep to himself. The town felt different too, restless under the hush of the season changing. People came through my door asking about new siding for winter, about salt for their steps, about heaters that rattled worse than my father's old lungs ever did. I knew their stories now, their debts, their grief, their quiet hopes folded into the daily grind. And they knew mine. One Saturday morning, Lydia showed up. She looked good. Healthy in that raw, unvarnished way people do when they've stopped lying to themselves. She leaned against the counter, nursing a paper cup of coffee that steamed in the cold draft sneaking through the door. "You heard from him?" she asked, like we were picking up the last line of an old, unfinished conversation. "No," I said. "You?" She shook her head. "Probably for the best. We didn't say Ellis's name. We didn't need to. His ghost was in every splinter Jamie pulled from the old shed boards, every nail I set in place behind the register. "How's Jamie?" she asked, eyes flicking to the back room where his boots sat lined up by the heater. "Good," I said. "Better than good some days." "He looks like him." "He does," I said, "but he doesn't act like him." Lydia laughed, a sound that cracked through the chill like a spark. "Guess that means you did something right." After she left, I found Jamie sitting in the shed doorway, elbows on his knees, staring out at the street like he was waiting for winter to bite down hard enough to prove he could stand it. I sat beside him on the stoop, feeling the cold creep through my jeans into my bones. "She says you look like him," I said. "She's right," Jamie said, "but you don't flinch when you say it anymore." Not much left to flinch at, I said. He nudged my arm with his shoulder. You ever think he's out there? Watching? No, I lied. Because I did think it. Every time the wind rattled the windows, every time I counted the receipts and found the numbers didn't add up the way they should. But ghosts don't watch, they wait. The frost hit early. We lost half the last paint shipment when the storage heater failed overnight. Jamie spent 2 days cursing the pipes, his breath fogging the aisles while I brewed pot after pot of too strong coffee that tasted like scorched hope. It didn't matter. We fixed it. We always did. Sometimes I'd wake to the sound of his hammer tapping against the old workbench. Just a soft, steady beat that matched my mother's voice in my memory. Hold on, Margot. Hold fast. One evening, just before Thanksgiving, a storm rolled in. The snow fell thick and wet, sticking to the new sign out front until the letters blurred into ghost shapes. I stood behind the counter, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingertips, listening to the radio hum out old holiday songs. I didn't have the heart to turn off. Jamie came in, hair dusted white, shoulders hunched against the cold. He set a battered envelope on the counter. Found this in the shed, he said. Behind the old workbench. I stared at it. Yellowed, corners soft with years of damp and neglect. My name scrawled across the front in my father's hand. I hadn't seen that handwriting since the day they lowered him into frozen ground. You gonna open it? Jamie asked. Not tonight, I said, sliding it under the cash box. He didn't push. Jamie knew the weight of unopened things. After he left, I made a cup of tea and sat in the back room, the envelope propped on my knee like a dare. I remembered the last letter my father ever wrote me, a check that bounced, a line that said, "Do what you want." I'd done exactly that. And here I was, sipping stale tea, the frost on the windows curling like the ghosts of words we never got right. I fell asleep with the letter in my lap. When I woke, the sun was just a bruise on the horizon, and the shop smelled like fresh coffee and pine from the box of new stock Jamie had dragged in before dawn. I didn't open the letter. Not that day. Not the day after either. Some debts can wait until you're ready to pay them. Christmas came soft and brutal all at once. The snow kept falling, burying the sidewalks, creeping up the sides of the shed until the door threatened to freeze shut. Jamie built a new latch for it, grumbling under his breath about the draft, about how winter was just another test to see if he'd stick around. You ever think about leaving? I asked him one night as we split a bottle of cheap whiskey by the space heater. Every day, he said. But every day I stay. So far. Good, I said. I'd hate to repaint the sign alone. We laughed, the sound echoing through the empty store like a promise we hadn't dared make before. I gave him the old hammer that Christmas morning. Wrapped in newspaper, a bow I'd snipped from a leftover length of ribbon someone left in the donation box. He turned it over in his hands, eyes tracing the worn initials carved into the handle. You sure? He asked. It's yours more than it ever was mine, I said. Just don't hang it up like some trophy, use it. He grinned, that fox smile warm for once. Yeah, I will. The new year cracked open with a frost that split the sidewalk out front like a bone. We patched it with leftover cement from the summer, our boots sinking into the slush as we worked side by side, steam rising from the buckets like ghosts in the morning light. I thought about that letter every night. Sometimes I'd slip it from its hiding place and run my thumb over my name, wondering what secrets my father thought he could keep in an envelope. But I didn't open it. Not yet. Jamie found me standing over it once, the paper soft between my fingers. You're gonna drive yourself nuts, he said. Probably, I said, but I've been worse. When February came, it brought more snow. More cracks in the pipes, more nights spent standing in the shed doorway, watching the frost settle like a promise I'd already survived. Some mornings, I'd catch Jamie staring at the old sign, the letters faded but stubborn. He'd run his fingertips over the grain, the same way I traced my mother's handwriting in her hidden letters. He'd ask me what came next. I'd tell him the truth. Whatever we make. And when the thaw finally came, dripping off the eaves, soaking into the roots that held this place upright. I knew I'd open that letter. I'd read every word. I'd pay that last debt no matter what it cost me. Because I'm Margot Renfield, and I've learned how to stand in the frost without breaking. Tomorrow I'll sweep the steps, flip the sign, open the door, and I'll keep building. I opened the letter on the first day of the thaw. It felt right. Sitting at the old counter, the door propped open just enough to let the smell of wet earth drift in while Jamie hammered away in the shed. For once the ghosts didn't gather close. They gave me room. The paper inside was brittle, ink smeared where the years had bled through. My father's handwriting looked smaller than I remembered, like even his anger had worn thin by the time he wrote it. Margot, asterisk. If you're reading this, you've already found what I left behind. Maybe you think it was out of spite. Maybe you think I trusted you more than Ellis. Bertego. I laughed out loud at that. Jamie's hammer paused. A single heartbeat of silence, then the tapping resumed. Truth is, I didn't trust either of you. I trusted the frost. Frost keeps the rot from spreading. Typical. Even dead, he thought he could bury his sins in riddles. The store is yours now. I knew you'd keep it standing when your brother tore everything else down. Maybe you hate me for what I did. You should. But don't hate the name. It's yours. Same as it was mine. No apology. No regrets. Just a final shove in the back, like he wanted me to stumble forward whether I liked it or not. I folded the letter and set it under the glass counter. Not locked away. Just there. Part of the bones now. Jamie stuck his head in, hair dusted with sawdust, and that grin twitching at the corner of his mouth. Well? He asked. He was an ass, I said. But he wasn't wrong. Jamie snorted. That's family for you. We spent that spring tearing down the last of the rotten shelves in the shed. Each plank came free like a pulled tooth, the smell of old mildew giving way to fresh timber and oil. Jamie sketched out plans on scrap cardboard, workbenches, new racks, maybe a corner for repairing things folks didn't know how to fix themselves. You sure we can handle that? I asked, eyeing the mess of boards piled up behind him. He tapped the hammer against his palm. We handled worse. You did anyway. Some afternoons we'd sit on the back steps, boots propped on the railing, sharing a bottle of cheap soda like kids with stolen time. He'd ask me to tell him stories about my mother, about the days before Ellis learned how to lie with a smile. I think she'd like this place now, he said once, voice low, eyes tracing the sign above the shed door. I think so too, I said. She'd have painted the walls pink and strung flowers from the rafters. He laughed, that same soft bark I'd grown to love. We could still do it. Don't push your luck, I said. But the idea lingered, petals blooming in the cracks where frost used to live. Summer crept in slow, the way it does when the earth remembers too well how to hold the cold. Jamie put up a new sign on the shed, Renfield Repairs. White paint. Steady brush strokes, no frills. Just a promise. Folks started bringing in old lamps, broken hinges, tools rusted from years of disuse. He fixed what he could, and what he couldn't, he'd learn to next time. One night after closing, I found him at the counter, flipping through my mother's letters. He looked up, guilt in his eyes, but I shook my head. It's fine, I said. You should know. Was she scared? He asked. Of him? I thought of my father's voice, the crack of glass against the wall, the nights my mother's hands shook when she thought no one could see. Yeah. But she stayed brave. That's harder. He traced a line of ink with his fingertip. I want to be like that. You already are, I said. And I meant it. July burned the sidewalks hot enough to melt the tar. We kept the fans running on high, sweat dripping into the floorboards we'd sanded clean last fall. Business slowed. Summer was for camping, not for hardware. But I didn't mind. Slow days gave me time to sit at the counter, pen in hand, scribbling plans for what came next. Sometimes Jamie would catch me smiling at nothing and shake his head. You planning world domination back there? Maybe, I'd say. Haven't decided yet. In the evenings, we'd open the back doors, let the dusk drift through the aisles. Fireflies gathered near the cracked windows. Jamie caught one in his palm, held it out to me, a tiny lantern flickering against his scarred fingers. "Think your brother ever saw this?" he asked. "Not like this," I said. Ellis saw the dark. He never waited for the light. Jamie let the firefly go. It blinked once, twice, then vanished into the night. By August, the town fair rolled in, a mess of tents and fried dough and cheap laughter echoing through the streets. I closed the shop early, told Jamie to come with me. He tried to protest, said he had work to finish. I tossed the keys at him anyway. "You've got work here," I said, pointing to his chest. "Time to remind it what fun feels like." We walked through the rows of stalls like we were strangers in someone else's dream. He won a stuffed bear at the ring toss, held it out to me with that crooked grin. "For the counter," he said. "Next to the firefly?" he snorted. "Next to the hammer." We ate funnel cake on the library steps, sugar sticking to our fingers, the ghost of my father's voice quiet for once. In that moment, I almost let myself believe Ellis was gone for good, that he'd drifted too far to ever find his way back to this place we'd rebuilt from his ashes. The first cold snap of September brought me back to myself. I found Jamie asleep on the shed floor, curled around the old hammer like a talisman. I draped a blanket over him, fingers brushing the dark smear of oil on his cheek. "Stay," I whispered to the dark. Not to him. Not really. To whatever piece of me still wondered if the frost would crack what we'd made. To whatever piece of Ellis lingered in the corners. To the dead I'd paid 100 times over but still felt pressed against my ribs when the wind howled through the rafters. Stay. The next morning he found me at the counter, the ledger open, the letter from my father tucked underneath. "You ever think it'll stop?" Jamie asked. "What?" "Feeling like he's still here." I traced my name on the envelope. "No, but I think it gets easier to stand it." Jamie tapped the hammer against the floor, the echo soft but sure. "Then I'll stand it with you." The frost would come again. The pipes would crack, the roof would leak, the name above the door would whisper its history into every nail and plank we touched. But when I locked up that night, I didn't feel like I was shutting the ghosts out. I felt like I was giving them shelter, keeping them where they couldn't hurt us anymore. And tomorrow, when I turned the key, when Jamie flipped the sign, when the dawn spilled gold across the old wooden floor, we'd open the door. Again and again and again. Because we were Renfields. Because we knew how to stand in the frost. Because we'd learned to build. Fall settled over the town like an old quilt, heavy in places, threadbare in others, warm enough to keep the ghosts at bay if you knew how to tuck it tight. I'd wake before dawn most mornings, slipping out of bed to watch the street lamps flicker over the new pavement. Ellis would never walk again. Jamie's boots would be lined up by the back door, laces tangled, his hammer resting on the shelf like a promise. October brought the first true frost, a thin sheen on the windows that caught the sunrise and scattered it like shards across the floorboards. The store felt smaller in the cold, each aisle crowded with the breath of the past and the hope we'd hammered together piece by piece. Jamie took to fixing the shed at odd hours, sandpaper rasping through the hush while I counted receipts behind the counter. Sometimes I'd stand in the doorway, watching him trace the grain of old wood with calloused fingertips, the ghost of Ellis fading a little more each time he lifted the hammer. One night he found me at the register, my mother's letters spread out like cards in a fortune-teller's hand. "You ever get tired of reading those?" he asked, leaning against the counter, a smudge of oil on his cheek. "Never," I said. "They remind me what forgiveness looks like." He snorted, picking up the letter from my father I'd left folded at the edge. "This one doesn't sound like forgiveness." "It doesn't," I said. "But it's a start." He set it back down, careful, like it might bite him. "Maybe you should burn it." "Maybe," I said, "but not yet." The town seemed to curl in on itself as the days shortened. The library's windows glowed gold at dusk, A promise that stories could live through any winter if you kept the lamps burning. The hardware store did the same. Neighbors came in for salt, for new shovels, for the same nails they'd buy again come spring, when the snow let go of the roof's grip. Sometimes they'd linger at the counter, fingers drumming the wood, eyes flicking to the plaque Lena had nailed by the door the summer before. Kijop. Renfield and Company. They'd ask about Ellis, about the house, about the mortgage they'd heard I owned and lost and claimed again. I'd smile. Let them wonder. Truth has sharp edges. Some stories grow sweeter when you leave the bitter parts unsaid. One cold Tuesday, Lydia stopped by, her breath fogging the glass as she pushed the door open. She looked older, hair pulled back tight, the skin around her eyes softer than I remembered. "You keeping him busy?" she asked, nodding toward the shed where Jamie's hammer rose and fell in a steady rhythm. "He keeps himself busy," I said. She laughed, a sound like cracked ice. "He's not his father, you know." "I know." She leaned against the counter, tracing the edge of the register with her thumbnail. "I used to dream about this place burning down. When Ellis was gone, when you were gone. Thought it'd be cleaner, easier." "Wouldn't have changed anything," I said. "Funny," she said. "Turns out you were the fire, not the ashes." When she left, she hugged me. Quick, awkward, like we both knew it wouldn't happen again. Her coat smelled like the same cheap perfume she'd worn when she first walked through that door years ago, but the scent didn't sting anymore. Some debts fade when you stop paying interest. November blew in hard. Pipes rattled in the walls, the heater groaned like an old dog settling its bones for the season. Jamie patched leaks, rewired the breaker box, cursed at the fuse that blew every time we plugged in the second space heater. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked one night, wiping his hands on a rag black with grease. "Every day," I said. "But the roots run deep." "You?" He shrugged, hair falling into his eyes. "Not since you gave me the hammer." We celebrated Thanksgiving with cheap wine and stale bread, sitting cross-legged on the shed floor while the wind whistled through the gaps in the boards. Jamie carved his initials into the workbench, a sharp line under the Renfield, and Sons Ellis had scrawled there when he was 17. "Hope that's okay," Jamie said, thumbs smearing the fresh wood. "Better than okay," I said. "It means you're staying." Christmas came soft and sharp all at once, the way winter always does when it remembers how to bite. I hung a single string of lights over the front window, their glow flickering against the frost that crept up the glass overnight. Customers lingered longer, their boots dripping snow on the floor I'd swept clean at dawn. One of them, Mrs. Dinning, who'd watched me bury my father with a face like she was counting her own years left a tin of cookies on the counter. "Your mother would be proud," she said, her voice thin as the ribbon she tied around the tin. "Thanks," I said. It was true, I thought. Maybe, maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. I was proud enough for both of us. On Christmas Eve, Jamie found a box wrapped in brown paper tucked under the counter. No name, no note. Inside, a new hammer, shiny and cold, the handle smooth as bone. He turned it over, eyes narrow. "You?" "Not me," I said. "Consider it a gift from the ghosts." He laughed, low and warm. "You think they're watching?" "Always," I said. "But we're the ones swinging the hammer now." That night, we sat on the steps out front, the snow falling soft as breath around us. Jamie balanced the new hammer across his knees, the old one resting beside it, a weight he no longer carried alone. "Think the frost'll break us this year?" he asked. I looked at the shop, the shed, the sign that bore my name and Ellis's, and the part of our father that refused to rot even when buried deep. "No," I said. "We've got roots now. Let it come." He leaned his head on my shoulder, the snow collecting in our hair, the quiet settling around us like the promise of spring waiting just out of reach. When I locked up that night, I tucked my mother's letters into the register drawer, the old envelope from my father pressed between their pages. I didn't need to read them anymore. I'd lived every line, paid every debt. Tomorrow I'd turn the key. Jamie would flip the sign. The frost would creep under the door, snake through the cracks in the walls, whisper the same old threats, and we'd stand. The final winter came in hard, like it had been saving up its worst for one last blow, to see if the old bones of Renfield and Company would splinter under the weight. Jamie and I patched the roof twice before December even settled its full claws in, our boots slipping on the frosted shingles while the wind tried to shove us off like an angry ghost. Every morning I'd light the old space heater in the back room, stand with my hands outstretched to the hiss of warm air and think, let the frost come, let it try. Jamie worked later than ever, sanding and hammering in the shed, until long after the streetlights flickered out. Sometimes I'd sit in the doorway, bundled in my mother's old coat, watching him test every board, every nail. He'd look up and grin when he caught me staring, his breath white against the dark. "Expecting it to collapse?" he'd ask. "Expecting you to keep it standing," I'd say. One Sunday, the pipes burst under the shop floor. I found Jamie in the crawl space at dawn, his boots sinking into cold mud, wrench clenched in frozen hands. I crouched at the hatch, flashlight steady. "You think he'd laugh if he could see us now?" Jamie asked. He meant Ellis, but neither of us said his name much anymore. That was our final mercy. "He'd laugh," I said, "and then he'd beg for a cut." Jamie barked a short, rough laugh, then went back to fighting the old pipe. When he climbed out, his fingers were raw, knuckles split like the ground in a hard freeze. He pressed his hands to the heater, wincing. "It's never really over, is it?" he said. "No," I said. "That's the point." The customers trickled in through January, boots tracking slush across the floorboards. Jamie scrubbed every night until they gleamed. They brought their cracked window panes, their squealing hinges, their questions they were too proud to ask anyone else. Each one left with something more than they'd come for. Sometimes they'd linger at the counter, eyes drifting to the plaque by the door. One old man, Mr. Delaney, who remembered my father's worst years better than I did, set a battered tin on the counter one morning, a rattle of old coins inside. "For the next frost," he said, voice rasped thin with time. "You'll need it more than I do." I tried to give it back. He curled my fingers around the tin instead. "Roots need watering," he said. "So do families." After he left, I tucked the tin under the register next to my mother's letters, and the envelope my father had scrawled my name across. Jamie found me there, knees drawn up behind the counter like a kid hiding from a storm. "You reading them again?" he asked. "Just remembering," I said. He didn't push. He never did. The storm hit in February, worse than any we'd seen in years. Drifts climbed halfway up the shed walls. The power flickered, died, came back in fits like it wasn't sure we deserved the light. Jamie hauled in extra wood, stoked the old stove so hot the paint on the kettle bubbled. One night I woke to the sound of the wind rattling the windows like fists. I found Jamie outside, shovel in hand, carving a narrow path from the front door to the street. Snow clung to his hair, turned his breath to steam. "You think it'll swallow us this time?" I asked, stepping into the drift. He leaned on the shovel, grinning that fox grin. "Only if we let it." We didn't. We never did. When March rolled in, the thaw came too fast. Ice cracked underfoot like bones snapping in the dirt. Water dripped through the patched roof, soaking the register if I didn't catch it fast enough. Jamie set buckets along the beams, his boots slipping on the slick floor. "We should have burned this place down," he muttered once, wringing water from his sleeve. "Too late now," I said. "Roots run deeper than rot." He laughed, but it stuck in his throat. That night, I found him in the shed, the old hammer in one hand, the new one in the other, like he couldn't decide which version of himself to trust more. "You're not him," I said from the doorway. "I know," he said, "but sometimes I hear him, like he's waiting for me to screw this up." "Then let him wait," I said. "You're not building this for him." He nodded, knuckles white around the handle. "You think it'll stand?" Longer than he did. When the snow finally gave up its hold, the earth under the steps was soft as new skin. We planted crocuses in the patch by the shed door. Jamie laughed at me when I knelt in the mud, pressing the bulbs down like secrets. "Never took you for the gardening type," he said. I'm not, I said, but I am the staying type. The flowers sprouted before April was halfway gone, tiny green shoots that bent in the wind but never snapped. I'd sit on the back steps some evenings, knees drawn to my chest, watching them shiver while Jamie hammered late into the dusk. One night he sat beside me, shoulder warm against mine. You ever wish you'd left him something? He asked. I didn't need to ask who. Ellis? Yeah, anything. I thought about the mortgage I'd claimed like a weapon, the house I'd sold out from under him, the trust I'd torn from his hands with signatures and stubbornness. I thought about Lydia, her face soft at the edges now, the way she never asked for more than I could give. I left him the one thing he hated most, I said. An ending he didn't control. Jamie leaned his head back, eyes closed. Maybe that's enough. Maybe, I said. May warmed the ground faster than I expected. The shed door stuck in the frame when the boards swelled with the damp. Jamie cursed every time he kicked it open, but he never stopped fixing what stuck. That was his way. He didn't run anymore, neither did I. On the first warm Sunday, we pulled everything out of the shed. Old boards, cracked glass, bent nails Ellis would have sold as new if he'd had the chance. We burned the worst of it in the barrel out back. Jamie tossed in the last broken sign, Renfield and Sons, without a word. We watched it curl in the flames, the paint blistering, the letters blackening until they were just smoke drifting into the clear sky. You feel better? He asked. I poked the ashes with a stick. No, but I feel lighter. Good enough, he said. June came in gentle. The crocuses bloomed, yellow and white and stubborn. Customers brought stories with their tools now, how their kids were moving back, how they'd repaint the porch if the frost didn't eat the boards again. Jamie and I listened, nodding, making promises we knew we'd keep. Some nights I'd catch him standing by the plaque Lena gave us, tracing the words with his thumb. You think they'd be proud? He asked once. My mother? I said. Yes. Ellis? Who cares? He smiled. Yeah, who cares? I found the tin from Mr. Delaney in the register one evening. A note tucked inside with the coins. Roots run deep. So does love. Jamie stuck it to the shed wall with a bent nail. I left it there. Some reminders don't need polishing. When July turned the air thick enough to choke, we propped the doors open. Let the heat spill through the aisles. I watched Jamie lift a new plank into place on the back wall, his shoulders broad with the work, the old hammer steady in his hand. You staying? I asked him, same as I'd asked 100 times before. He looked at me, sweat dripping from his brow, the grin just a shadow of Ellis but realer than anything that man had ever given me. Yeah, he said, I'm staying. When I turned the sign that night, I saw our reflection in the glass, 2 figures standing side by side in the shop my father built, the one Ellis tried to bury me in. 2 figures holding the frost back with their bare hands. Tomorrow we'd open the door again. We'd stand in the thaw and the freeze, shoulder to shoulder. We'd plant flowers in the mud, hammer boards into place, chase the leaks and cracks and ghosts until they learned to settle quiet. We'd live here. Like roots. Like frost. Like forgiveness that comes slow, but stays for good. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.